So we're going to go back and start at the beginning. Can you tell us what made you decide to become an attorney and describe your law school experience?
You don't realize how old I am, do you? What made me become an attorney was I wanted to be an engineer, and I graduated in chemical engineering at State. Worked a summer with a food chemical company between my junior and senior year. And after that summer experience, I decided, maybe I don't want to make this a career in terms of what I learned. And so I decided to go to law school afterwards, since I was so undecided. And I figured a law degree would open some other doors. And since I had an engineering degree, I wanted to use my engineering training. So I took every patent law course I could, fully anticipating becoming a patent attorney. And I went to law school at night for 4 years, and so I had a 4-year training at Georgetown and worked for the U.S. Patent Office while I went to law school to pay my way through. And the last year and a half, I left the patent office and went with a private patent attorney firm to get experience in that. And this was before the internet, so everything was done by mail, fax, telephone, and occasional face-to-face interviews with various inventors. And after a year and a half of that, I thought, this is not quite what I had in mind. And so then I'm like, what do I do now? And I went back to speak to one of my good friends whose opinion and wisdom I trusted working in the patent office. Told him my dilemma, and he suggested that I maybe apply for clerkship with a federal judge. And that would expose me to civil law, criminal law, all sorts of things. I would have a mentor to learn from. And it sounded like a good idea, so I sent out dozens of letters to various federal judges. I think included Texas, Washington, D.C., Raleigh, and Miami, among the few. Was scheduled for an interview in Raleigh with Judge Frank Dupree here, who is a mentor for Rich Leonard, who you just spoke with. And I had an interview with a federal judge in Miami. Well, the interview in Raleigh came up first. I came, and shortly after the interview, Judge Dupree asked if I wanted to be one of his law clerks. And I told him I still had an interview I'd committed to. And he was very gracious and told me to go ahead with the interview. And I called the judge in Florida before I went for the interview, and that judge says, these don't come along very often, Mr. Lawton, so you might want to go ahead and take that offer. I have one more interview, and you're right in the mix, but I can't commit to you now. So I accepted Judge Dupree's offer. That got me here. 2 years, that experience was wonderful, and Judge Dupree was a great teacher and mentor and ultimately a friend before he died. He swore me into my current job, as a matter of fact. And after that, I still didn't know. I was just kind of adrift, and I went to work for a few law firms, different firms, and after 7 or 8 years with firms, I learned a lot at those firms, increased the capacity of my practice, opened a completely different area of practice. And not long after that, I decided I wanted to just kind of hang up my own shingle and find a office to rent in a building run by another law firm. And so for 12 years I did that. And I had a lot of experience in district court in particular. and became friends with, there were, at the time, I think there were only like 5 or 6 district court judges, and now there's, 21? So we've grown. And when Judge Basin decided he was going to retire, I kind of asked him if I could have some time with him, and I told him I wanted to seek the appointment to fill his unexpired term. And that's what got it started. And at the time, I was able to endeavor to make a phone contact with every licensed lawyer in Wake County. Back then, there were only about 2,000. Now there's, you know better than I how many there are, but there's probably 2.5, 3 times that many. And was fortunate enough to get recommended to the governor. Governor Martin appointed me. He only had Democrats to choose from under the system in place at the time. And so I had kind of a bipartisan approach, because my judge I clerked for was a Republican federal judge. So I had been exposed to both sides of politics, and Governor Martin graciously gave me the job, and I've been in it since 1991. So that's how I got to law. That's how I got to the judgeship I'm in now, currently as an emergency judge. But it was kind of a wind-tossed sail, and I think there was a greater hand at work that I could only see at work as I look back on how I got to where I am. But it was an interesting ride, to say the least.
So you mentioned mentor. Talk to me about, in your career, the importance of a mentor-mentee relationship with both you as the mentor and as the mentee.
Well, as a new lawyer, I was the one being mentored. And, of course, Judge Dupree was just a prince of a gentleman. It's funny, you don't look at federal judges, they're kind of a terrifying being, and yet working for 2 years with Judge Dupree, he became almost a father figure and a dear friend. My dad had passed away before I got that job. And, well, no, he hadn't, but I spent more time. My mom and dad lived about 3 or 4 hours away, so I was daily in contact with Judge Dupree, and he literally became a father figure. But he didn't hesitate to tell me when my work wasn't up to snuff. He would sit me down. He played tennis with his clerks. We ate together. I just had all kinds of life questions, law questions, and he would kind of steer me as best he could. I'm not sure Judge Dupree even knew what I wanted to do in terms of a specialty. He was my big mentor. And then back when I started practicing law in 1972, the county bar was small and very, very close, actually. The defense lawyers and the prosecutors and the judges, it was not uncommon for a break to be taken in the previous courthouse building, and about 40-minute break, and the cops, judges, defense, and prosecutors would all go up, grab coffee, a donut, and sit around a table. And that's where I learned probably as much about district court practice as anything, because everybody shared freely, and it was a much more cordial, almost fraternal, and I don't mean that in a male-female way. There were a decent number. Judge Hamilton was a prosecutor at the time. I was a defense lawyer. But we all sat around and shared stories. You could sit around the table, an observer would sit around the table and see pleas being worked out, defense and prosecutors sharing the strengths and weaknesses of their cases. It was a much more open line of communication, and so I learned a ton doing that. I haven't done a whole lot of mentoring because I never felt, honestly, even though I'd been practicing law by the time I went on my own for 8 years and then spent 12 years in private practice, to be honest, I never felt particularly competent to mentor a young attorney because of the drift I was in to get where I ultimately ended up. But I do lunch with a lawyer and had some years I had really good close relationships with the kids. Back then we spent more time with them on an extended basis during the summer. I don't hesitate to share when people are introduced to me in my current job and they're going to law school, they're an intern here, an intern there. I don't hesitate to using my experience of being blown by the winds of change to suggest to them that they find something while they're in law school that they really are committed to and take all the elective courses they can, directing them to that field so that when they get out of law school, they are more self-directed than I was. And they are preparing themselves for a career in something they know that they're particularly interested in, and I was not that way at all. So that's about the only mentoring I've done. Whatever mentoring I've done, it's been talking to defense and prosecuting lawyers, how they did in a case, what they could have done better. I don't mind doing that, and I try to make it known to both sides that I will do that to anybody who asks me questions. And sometimes when the trial's over with, I look at both lawyers and say, if you have any questions about how I reached the decision I reached, I'll be happy to talk with you, because I don't want to be in the midst of some ex parte communication fiasco today. But I haven't done as much mentoring as I probably should have, to be honest, but I was mentored well and lovingly by the people who helped me out.
It sounds like transparency in the legal profession is important to you.
Very important to me. I'm not sure it's too important to the bar as a whole today, to be honest. When I was practicing, when I did criminal defense work, I did not, and maybe I had the wrong outlook, but I did not view my job as to get my client off. I viewed my job as to make sure they got a fair trial, and that if a state couldn't produce competent evidence, that it be out and let the judge or the jury decide whether my client should be let free or not. I'm not sure that that's the common view nowadays. What I see is, in a lot of instances, certainly not. I don't have a good perspective for you now, because since I retired in 2004, most of my experience as an emergency judge has been in criminal court, a little bit of juvenile court, but not much in the last 10 years, and domestic family law court. But I do see a lot of combative, win at all costs kind of approach to the legal profession, which personally I would not do. And if that's the common attitude nowadays, I'm not sure I'd get into law, because I don't think that would be my job as a lawyer. I think the facts decide cases, civil and criminal, not a win at all cost attitude.
Okay, so that change leads me into the next question. What do you think the most significant changes in the legal profession over your career has been?
Well, considering I started in 1972 when the old, what I call the old courthouse first opened, the bar was small. I know everybody on the list that you're interviewing today, close to every one of them at some point in time in my career. I am certain, without a doubt, that at some point in time in my career, I would ask them for help or get advice, or it was a very cordial, close bar. It didn't matter what practice you were in. We ate together. We had bar lunches together. The bar Christmas party was a small, relatively social event. and I look forward to it immensely because I saw people I didn't see much during the year, especially the lawyers I grew up with. And when I started, politics was competitive, to use a nice word, but the lawyers that when I was trying to get appointed to the job, by the governor to the district court judgeship I was seeking, I didn't care what the politics were. Howdy Manning, a Republican Superior Court judge, I sought advice and guidance from. One of the older lawyers, Armistead Maupin, fine gentleman, wonderful man. I went and spoke with him about my goal to get that job. And that was 20 years later, mind you, but I befriended those people and we all got to know each other in the 70s when I grew up as a baby lawyer. We all everybody knew everybody. And if a lawyer dropped the ball on something, they could pick up the phone and call the attorney on the other side and say, look, I messed up. Can I have 20 more days to do this or 10 more days to do that? Or can I hold off filing an answer while I'm trying to work out something with my client? That kind of thing. And it was common for the lawyer on the other side to say, sure, just don't wait too long. Let me know what's going on. I don't see much. I've been a judge since 1991, so I don't know what's going on in the private practice world now. But I sense that that's not quite as free-flowing as it was when I started.
Do you think it could be the size of our area and the number of attorneys that we have now and the number of people that we have now that could contribute to that change?
Oh, yes. I think the size of the bar, the size of the city, of course, the current atmosphere of opinions is so powerful and so persuasive in social media and all the various news sources is that I worry that the country will never be a whole lot less divided than it is now because granted there are news sources where you and I can go and we can get ample views on both sides of almost any issue, but the trouble as I see it, according to an author that I've been referred to, is that having access to all of those points of view doesn't mean the people are going to go listen to all those points of view. What most people are going to do is go to only those sources that reinforce what they already think. And I think that that dynamic is at work in society today. Plus, we have, 5,000 lawyers in Wake County now? If you count government, maybe 6. It's kind of hard to have that kind of camaraderie that existed when I started. I had no problem going to a senior partner of a law firm if I knew who they were to get some advice on something. You probably have to go through a gauntlet of people to get those kind of appointments and opportunities now. So I think the size of the bar, the law has changed, the attitude toward the law has changed, and I think they're a counterweight to the kind of professional camaraderie and care for not just the law, but for each other. It's not as easy to get that now because we're just too big. So that's the one thing I see, and it's a negative for me. I don't think it's intentional on the part of the lawyers. And nowadays, I'd say for the last 10 years, almost exclusively I've held court in criminal court of various sorts, DWI, whatever it might be. And the combativeness I see, to me, seems so very unprofessional. And that's why I was reading the the code of professional responsibility hanging out on the wall out there. To be honest, I've never seen it before. And I think every lawyer should know the minute they get a law license, they should know at least if that's what Wake County expects of you as a lawyer. And to be honest, I don't see it as ideally. I had to give a talk on professionalism in Atlanta on a world gathering of Christian lawyers, and the very first person I went to is Robert McMillan, who I think is the poster lawyer for professional conduct and love and care, and if you can't say anything good about somebody, don't say anything at all kind of man. And he freely gave me everything that I needed to prepare for that presentation, and he didn't hold it back. He didn't want to have any credit for it. It probably could have been copyrighted by him. It was the stuff he gave me was beautiful, and I got many compliments from the presentation. I don't know how much of that's going on because of what I see, the combative attitude I see in criminal court. I have to question how much of that's going on now in the law practice.
So you talk about the combative nature that you see from attorneys in court. What about...
They snipe at each other in court, and that's so disconcerting for me. When I practiced law, some of my best friends were prosecutors, and I'm sure one of them went to bat for me on a complaint filed by my client. And my client was so combative with me during the course of the trial that Marty came up to me afterwards, and he's not a prosecutor now. He's still practicing law, and I only see him at funerals now, sad to say. But I consider him a close friend. And he came up to me afterwards and said, whatever you need, I'll be glad to give it to you. So, and we ate together, we drank coffee together, we laughed together. Now the structure of the courthouse is such as that defense lawyers, I could just walk into a DA's office anytime when I was in private practice if they were there. Nowadays you have to go through, you can't get to the back hall, only DAs and public defenders can get back there, and judges. You have to go up to their offices and go through the receptionist, and it's more tightly controlled, I'd say now.
Do you think that the Bar Association helps with the collegiality?
Yes.
Tell me about that.
Well, I didn't do too many sports, but I did play tennis and I did play basketball, and I loved meeting lawyers. Notwithstanding the fact that we beat each other up on a basketball court, I met people I never would run across in a private practice. I loved the in-person luncheons, and I understand COVID kind of threw a huge monkey wrench into that, but those lunches were fun, and I usually would find a table with somebody I hadn't seen in a while. And the small gatherings, the small CLEs, different divisions of the bar are wonderful. And that's why I think being a member, I don't even remember what the dues are now, $170 or something like that. $185. I mean, divide that up by 12. I mean, you spend that much on soft drinks in 2 weeks. I think every lawyer should be a member of the bar, should attend the stuff. I don't as much anymore, but when I was in private practice and when I was, and even after I early became a judge, I attended all that stuff. I wanted to know these people. I wanted to meet them. I wanted to figure out what made them tick. And yeah, I think the bar is a critical piece of that. And if we don't, if there is no county bar association, and I even urge state lawyers to do that, because I understand the pay's not good, but I can assure the state lawyers that until I was about 2 years away from being a district court judge, I made a living on what I made, and my lifestyle was dictated by what I made. And I didn't make a whole lot of money. I was happy to be in control of my own life, especially as a solo practitioner, but I wasn't a fat cat driving a fancy car. It was only 3 years out of being a judge that I felt I'd gotten to a point, income-wise, that I was really what I would call comfortable. But I try to tell the state lawyers, the ones I know, well, come on, it's just not that much money. And I understand you work for the AG or whatever state department you work for, but you won't be that. You may not be there forever, and you need to get to know how the lawyers that you go up against think, and be friends with them. And after the battle's been fought, go out and have a beer with them, or have a cup of coffee and a donut with them, and shake hands and restore that relationship that was made tense for whatever the life of that case was. I don't know how much of that's going on now. Now I sense that defense lawyers congregate with defense lawyers, and prosecutors congregate with prosecutors. And a dear friend who's now passed away, Gary Presnell, used to throw an annual summer party where he'd invite prosecutors and defense lawyers to come together, laugh and talk and have a beer. And Gary as much as told me that his goal was to build back that collegiality that I sensed that he thought was melting away like I did and do.
So I'm going to change gears. I got another question for you. What can you tell us? What was an example of a challenging ethical dilemma that you faced in your career, and how did you navigate that?
Oh my gosh. Ethical dilemma. It's probably, I didn't anticipate this. Let's put it this way. The one briar patch I got in as a lawyer was a long, drawn-out battle between people who were friends, started a company, and they didn't have the same idea how the company should go. And they were of the same faith, probably went to the same religious institution. They're friends. They had mutual friends. And I ended up having to deal with the bank that they were struggling with. And I was constantly going to the lawyer for the bank and saying, they at one point filed a lawsuit, and I didn't file an answer, and I asked them if I could have time to file an answer, and then it dragged on for a long time, and I guess the ethical dilemma was me putting myself in a position where I could be taken advantage of. And the lawyer for the bank was very, very kind. It was a female attorney who, at the time, I knew well and was close to, and at my age, if I don't see people, I don't hold on to their names as much. And she always worked with me, and I would pay some money to the bank, and that would hold off. And so for the longest kind of time, probably in excess of 12 months, I never filed an answer. Well, the other partner, the other person in the business, hired a lawyer who convinced him to buy out the bank. And the next thing I know, I'm getting a copy of a high six-figure judgment against me, default judgment, because I never filed an answer. And the lawyer's hands were kind of tied. So I had, and this is an example of how you need to build up a relationship with the people that you never think you'll need. And I had to file a motion to set aside the default judgment, allow me to file an answer, and put the case in the posture it needed to be in. That was my ethical dilemma. And the then clerk of court, who I grew up in the bar with, I spent hours and hours filling out that paperwork to get that set aside. And the clerk set it aside. That was my ethical dilemma. I guess the only other ethic, if it's an ethical dilemma, it's my self-created ethical dilemma. Again, it's always me. Because I'm so willing to talk to lawyers who litigate criminal law in front of me, I freely talk to them. And I think both sides of the bar know that I will freely give opinions. If they ask me, how do you think I did? What could I have done better? I will do that. And the rule about ex parte communications, I know I'm balancing, walking on a thin line there, but that I think if the lawyer asks me if they're going to be a better lawyer, I need to tell them what I think. The only time that's sort of bit me in the bum, a good friend of mine who's also a long-standing lawyer said, "You're never going to hear this, Judge Lawton. Can I ask your opinion about this?" And it wasn't a case that was over. I said, "Well, you know, if I give you my opinion, you can never have this case in front of me again." And he said, "That's all right. You're never going to have it. It's going to be gone shortly." And then lo and behold, I'm holding court, and here he is, and the case is there in front of me. And Bill reminded me. And the minute he reminded me, I thought, oh, yes. And so that case had to either be continued or taken to another courtroom. So that was a self-created ethical dilemma, I suppose. And fortunately for me, the lawyer that I grew up in the bar with, he's about 15 years younger than me, maybe more, but he's been in the bar when it was small, and now it's bigger. And he was courteous and kind enough to bring that to my attention so that I didn't get myself in a bind. And I'd have gotten halfway if he hadn't have told me that. And I wonder sometimes when I see the combativeness among the bar nowadays, I wonder sometimes had a different lawyer seen that situation, would they have told me? Or would they have gone ahead and then all of a sudden something snaps in my brain and I go, oh my God, I need to declare a mistrial. And then Lord knows what would happen after that. Judicial standards, who knows? So that's why I think clarity, transparency, and communication and care for each other is so important in the bar. And that's why I love that professionalism creed that you all have out there. It needs to be part of our cell structure.
So talk to me about, in this profession, because you're in the street, and you can be bar.
Well, there's serious doubt in the bar about whether I'm still an attorney or not.
But as you know, through your career, this profession lends itself to stress and pressure and all of that. So how did you manage that? How did you manage caseloads? How did you manage being a judge? If work-life balance was such a thing, how did you manage that?
It depends on whether you're talking to the me of 25 years ago or 30 years ago or the me today. How I handle stress today, I have a very strong faith, and I go to people when it's tested and when it shows up in my marriage or shows up in my relationships. I have people I can go to and a place to go to relieve stress. Back when I was a young lawyer and hadn't wisened up, I used playing basketball in the middle of the day. If I was terribly stressed, and the lawyers who played basketball with and against me would verify this, I would go to the Y. If I could get away, I'd go to the Y at 11:30 and not come back to the office till 2:30. And in that time period, literally exhaust myself, beating up on my opponents playing basketball. Tennis wasn't quite as gratifying because it wasn't quite as physical, but I would come back from that completely spent. And whatever anger or stress I had, I was too tired for it to affect me anymore. So I used that distraction to get rid of stress. Fortunately for me, I always was able to make do with what I made. I do remember going to my father maybe 7 or 8 years into the practice of law and asking him for money that I needed because it was a particularly dry month. But I didn't do that but one time, and he freely gave, like good fathers do. So I had a fallback. So I wasn't so stressed and so tight without a fallback person for help that I would turn to drink more. I never got hooked on drugs, thank God. I'm not sure why. I think God just protected me from that. Maybe he wanted to see me live long enough to find my way, but I did probably drink too much. I smoked for a while. Those were my sins that did help relieve stress, I must admit. But I did not. Most of my stress was self-induced, and it wasn't necessarily from the practice of law, believe it or not. Notwithstanding the fact that I didn't make a whole lot of money, the only stress in the law practice I had was when I represented a client and the prosecutor gave me a plea offer and said at 12 noon today the plea offer is gone. If you don't take it, we're going to trial and I'm going to try to get your client have the book thrown at them. That kind of stress, I don't know that I handled it. It just existed. I probably compartmentalized it. And that's what I think creates, obviously, more stress. But I had lawyers to turn to, too. The bar was collegial enough that I could, if I had a problem with a prosecutor, I could go to another prosecutor that I was really close to. And I remember one time I had a hard time with one of the district court judges, and he was one I didn't feel like I could approach. And I went to talk to Judge Basin, another judge, said, how do I handle this situation? And that's how I handle stress in the practice of law. So, and I think the lawyers can help each other in that regard. I'm glad we have the Bar Cares program. Back in the beginning, we were small enough that the lawyers literally cared for each other. And they didn't have enemies in the DA's office or enemies in the defense bar. They realized that they were in the same boat. They just weren't rowing in the same direction, but they were in the same boat, and if the boat sank, they would sink with
it. I love that answer. And you touched on it, but I want to ask, tell me through your career, your life outside the law, and your interest there.
You want my sinful life or my non-sinful life?
This is your life outside the law.
My life outside the law was not as broad as some people. I wasn't as spread as thin as other people were. My first marriage did not succeed, and I'm sorry for that. We became friends after that and tried to raise a kid separately but together. The person I am now, I dare say, would have made that marriage work, but the person I was then was not that committed to it. That was my downfall. But my life, I was so hooked on basketball and tennis and the two sports that I played, that my life outside of that was those two sports and my relationship and my marriage and my son. I didn't party a lot. I was not one of these people to head down to Glenwood South, which was not a thing back when I first started practicing law. I wasn't a party goer. I think being a clerk to a federal judge for 2 years exposed me to how the consequences of my bad decisions will stick with me for life. And so that helped me be a little bit more critical, but I made some bad decisions in life that I'm still regretful of. But my life itself outside the law was centered around family, the two sports that I loved, NC State athletics, I'd go to those events. But I wasn't spread thin. I didn't. I had these lanes that I walked in and didn't deviate from them too much. So I didn't have those kinds of outside stresses other than my first marriage failing. And of course, in every relationship, you have periods of struggle. And I've been married now for 37 years, and we had a couple of periods of struggle, but we made it through. And I didn't have any place else to go. So, you either make it work or you make a problem for yourself. And the second go around, we made it work, and we're as in love now as we ever were. But nowadays, outside the law, it's faith, family, my church family. Both Wendy and I don't have many blood relatives left. You could sit our entire nuclear blood-related family around one table for 10 at Thanksgiving for both families. So those who know me well now, it's neighborhood, church, now gym and the pool instead of tennis and basketball. Much lower impact sports, and my body is probably much more thankful. But my lanes are few.
What about the Wolfpack you so far?
Oh yeah. Loved last year's basketball season. I don't think I'll live for the 137 years from now, but I did see the 137 years ago, and I saw the one this year. I would love to think I would live to see the next one, then it won't be 37 years away. But yeah, my wife is an avid Wolfpack fan, and so am I. So we loved the basketball season. We're not so happy with football this year, but I'm not sure Duke's the only one locally that's having a good football season so far. So all the rest of us are unhappy.
What is after all of these years, law in Wake County, and you gave some good advice throughout this interview. What would you tell this next generation of attorneys in Wake County? What's your advice to them?
They're not going to listen. Because my advice, I think, would be different because my outlook toward the law is different. It hasn't changed much. But I think and I haven't talked to that many lawyers about it. I can only tell you the conclusions I'm drawing from what I see in criminal court. But I think if I were to say what I think a good lawyer should be an unyielding adversary for their client, but not have a win-at-all-costs attitude. Most lawyers know whether they can win a case or not long before it goes to trial. I would say try to work out what can be worked out. Be a friend to your adversary, and if you can't be a friend to your adversary because you don't know them well enough, after the trial's over, make it a point to do something with them together to find out what makes them tick. Sometimes the reason that you don't like that lawyer is because the firm or the DA or the agency they work for has some policy that you think is ridiculous, but they'll get fired if they deviate from it. So you need to know what makes your adversaries tick. But I think the key thing is to be transparent and open and be willing to call a spade a spade. Not give up the fight. Your job is to make sure competent evidence gets in and the judge or the jury hears what's legally admissible to be heard. But once you've done that job, it's out of your hands. So don't be mad at the judge. Don't be mad at the jury. Don't be mad at your client if you found out your client didn't tell you the whole truth. Most criminal clients, many times, don't want to admit the whole truth to themselves. So don't let a case be a brick that after 15 years or so, it's not just a little brick trim, it's a brick wall that you can't knocked down. So that's, for what it's worth, that's my piece of advice. You cannot go through the practice of law making enemies of your adversaries on the other side. If you do that, your life just gets worse and worse as time goes on, because you don't have the ability to negotiate with an enemy. If you're open and transparent with the people you deal with, they'll never shut the door on you. They will never build that wall against you, and you'll always be someone they can trust. That they can trust your word and you can trust their word. But I don't know whether we're so big and impersonal now in Wake County. I think a lot of the things I did in my law practice would be considered malpractice. Now, not a lot, but I can count on at least one hand several situations where, and the one I talked to you about at length would be one of them. So there's not as much flexibility, I don't think, in today's, because we're not as close-knit, and therefore you don't have as much independent control over the situation. You've got managing partners of your law firm, or you've got the DA or the U.S. attorney you've got to answer to. But I still think you can be collegial. You can be an advocate for your client and still know this code of professionalism you have outside on the wall, and you can still put it to practice. And if you put it to practice and everybody you deal with, they're going to know that you're a person of your word and somebody you can trust.
So my last question to you is, who else do you think we should interview for this series, if you had to pick someone?
Who I think you should interview?
For us, for the history of WCBA.
Well, the people you're interviewing today, that's quite a list of the current above ground who's who in the Wake County Bar. All of them are fine. Matter of fact, I'm probably the least interesting person you're going to interview today, because those people are titans. Rich Leonard and Robert Rader and Nick Fountain. Nick, I considered a friend, and I probably haven't seen Nick Fountain face to face, except at the Christmas party, in years. And if I could, let me back up the advice that I would give. I was asked to speak to a graduating law class at North Carolina Central, and it was a gal in my church asked me to do it because she's a lawyer in Durham, and I took Robert's piece he gave me on professionalism, but I decided to key my talk to them on several things: integrity, trust, reliability, and caring for each other. And my whole talk was on those key words. And everything, to be honest, everything I said was a paraphrase of Scripture. Every word of it. The kids loved it. They came up, talked to me about it. And the gal who asked me to speak said, "That was wonderful. Where did you get it?" And I took my whole speech. I handed it to her, and parenthetically at the end of each statement or each section was what I based it off of. And, there's plenty of places to get good advice on integrity, trustworthiness, faithfulness, that kind of thing. And I just happened to use that. I thought, how can I go wrong using that as a source? So most of my advice to people would come that way. If you want to be a successful lawyer, you want to be somebody who's cared for, who's trusted, who's known to be honest, and who's known to be faithful to their word, and their yes is their yes and their no is their no. Now back to your current question. Who? Well, obviously, number one, sadly, you've already interviewed him, thank God, Robert McMillan Sr. What a prince. You got Judge Rader. If Stafford Bullock was still alive, I would say interview him. He was a district court judge, then a superior court judge during my my career as a lawyer. Howard Manning is still alive. He had a terrible time in the hospital, and he's got some limitations now. He was the one that took the Leandra school case and literally was the judge on it for decades. Howdy Manning would be a great one to talk to. His dad would be a great civil lawyer to talk to, but he's passed on. I'm 78 years old. A lot of people I grew up in the bar with have passed on. Most recently, my dear friend Duncan McMillan. I love Duncan, and boy, what a broken heart that was. I know so many people in the bar. Many of them have passed on. Jim Hunt, if he's still around, he was a lawyer before he became governor. I would certainly, if he's capable of having an interview, he'd be right up at the top of my list. I don't know whether Jim Martin was a lawyer, the governor that appointed me. Not that you talked to him because he appointed me, but I've read some op-eds in the newspaper that he's written on the opinion page of the News and Observer. I don't know whether Jim Martin was a lawyer or not, but if he was, he'd be a perfect one to interview. Some of the former attorney generals.
Let me ask you this. So for our 120th celebration in 20 years,
20 years.
who are we going to interview?
Well, I'll be dead, so I don't know who that will be. If I'm alive, you don't want to interview me. I'll probably be so grumpy and set in my ways that the interview would get 2-word answers. Yes, you'd only get yeses and nos out of me. I was prepared to tell you about my most interesting case, but you didn't ask me that. 20 years from now. Colin Willoughby is back in the practice of law. Are you going to interview him for this? Okay. How about Lauren Freeman? I would say 20 years, Lauren Freeman would give you some good insight. That means I have to be 58 at the time. Half the lawyers I know weren't around then. Half the lawyers I know then are around now. Some of the bar presidents, I think, would be good to interview. And I think 20 years from now, you'll have 20 years worth of bar presidents still alive who would be much better qualified to answer, how has the bar changed? If you took 20 years worth of bar presidents and just asked them that one question, it would be an amazing piece of printed journalism that y'all could put together.
Your most interesting case, tell us about it.
The most interesting and two of them, most challenging cases. Both of them domestic.
Okay.
One was in Fayetteville when I was a visiting judge, and the other was when I was full-time in Wake County. The one most meaningful in terms of its long-term import. I was asked to preside over a domestic case in Fayetteville, and the issue turned out to be, what was challenged was the constitutionality of the child support guidelines. And a ruling that they were unconstitutional would throw the domestic bar back into a case by case by case by case personality assault that would sway any trier of fact to lean one way or the other. And what I appreciated so much about the child support guidelines was that they took the personality out of the issue, because the issue was for children, not for parents. We tried that case for 3 days, and I heard economic experts from major universities, I took notes until my hands were falling off. And I never have been a judge who would decide a case at the conclusion. I would always worry that I'd miss something or forget something. So I always allowed myself time to go through my notes. But this one took a long time, and I remember holding court in Durham and getting there early and finding an anteroom and spending the entire time before court started writing down findings and conclusions that addressed the constitutionality of the guidelines. And I heard legal experts on constitutionality. I mean, it just racked my brain for probably 2 weeks it took me to write this opinion. And I took great care because I'd been reversed once in a civil domestic violence case by the Court of Appeals. I still think I was right, but I understood their decision. And this one was too important for me to get wrong. So I hope I've got my notes somewhere. I don't know where they might be, but I ended up having like 50 to 60 findings of fact and 30 or 40 conclusions of law. And I took great care to make it clear to the appellate panel that was going to hear it why I did what I did and what the testimony was that caused me to do what I did. I eventually came down to ruling that they were constitutional. And it went to the Court of Appeals, and they affirmed me, which I was happy to see, not because they affirmed me, but because the guidelines to me took a lot of the anguish and name-calling out of the issue. And they not one time referred to the lower court's decision. But that's okay, because they affirmed it and those guidelines are still in place nowadays. To me, that was the most momentous one. The other one I tried was a case between a mom and a dad with shared custody, week with mom, week with the dad here in Wake County. Kids were happy, parents were happy, and one of them got a job offer in Roanoke, Virginia. Like 8-9 years since they'd split. So I knew that situation couldn't stay, because they weren't in the same school district. And that was rough. That was hard. And these people were so good and kind and reasonable with each other. I'm not going to bother you with the details, but usually you got a scale and you're looking at the big things and then the smaller things and then the smaller things and then the smaller things. And my decision ended up being based on factors that were like 5 or 6 down from the biggest, most important things. They were that close to each other. I could have ruled either way and it would have been sustained.
So what did you decide?
I had to give the kids to the parent that moved to Roanoke. And I won't tell you why, but I can tell you it wasn't based on income. It wasn't based on mom or dad's personality. It wasn't based on job. It wasn't based on household. I mean, these people were so alike all the way down the line. But I had to make a call, and I had to find a reason to make a call. So I gave custody, primary physical custody, to the parent that moved to Roanoke with their job.
Do you know how it turned out for that family?
I don't. But I do. I did keep a picture. Domestic law is why I didn't run for re-election in 2004. I spent 18 months in that rotation, and it just took my heart and soul away. And I said I'd never do that again. So when my wife retired, I asked her if she'd care if I retired. But I've got a folder at my house with a picture, because the parents always throw pictures in all the custody cases. I've got a picture of every kid whose custody I decided. I don't remember how I decided them all, and I've got stories about how I thought young kids were that older children were more flexible than younger kids, which turned out I was proven very badly wrong on that. But I did have one lady, I remember making a comment. I told the lawyer to tell his or her client that tell your lady she won the case. She made it a point to write me a letter that said I didn't win anything. If you think I'm a winner, you're wrong. I mean, it was a rightfully scathing letter. Interestingly enough, the kid was 7 or 8. She took the time to write me a letter when the kid was graduating from college. Said, I want to show you a picture of the son that you ruled custody on. And I thought that was wonderful. I've still got that somewhere. I don't know where. My son will find it. But those are the 2 cases that were most significant to me personally for very wildly different reasons.
Well, thank you so much. Did I make it painless in a hurry?
Well, you haven't cross-examined me yet, but that's good.